Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. It is 12:03, so we will get started in about 1 minute, but I want to let anyone else who was planning on joining get a chance to grab that cup of coffee, get their lunch or whatever. So we will start in about 60 seconds. All right, I think that was probably about 45 seconds, but let's just get going. Does that sound good to you, George?
If I could have 30 more seconds, brother,
Yeah,
that'd be my
sure, you
favorite.
bet. And while George is doing that, I'll go and quickly introduce myself and go over our disclosures. So first of all, if I haven't met you before, my name is Matt Moore. I'm a business development manager here at Camaplan. So I spend my days talking to folks like George to work together. As we're going to get started with the presentation shortly here, but I wanted to go over this housekeeping with you. This is our disclosure. Camaplan does not provide investment advice or endorsements due to the nature of our industry. Camaplan is not an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. If tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other similar expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought. All information and materials presented on Camaplan webinars and podcasts are provided for educational purposes only. We strongly encourage you to consult with your attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors before entering any type of investment. All right, so check that box. George, how you feeling?
I am doing great, brother. Well, we've just need a little bit of approval here on sharing screen.
All right. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. 1 second. You should be all set, George.
Okay.
Great. So we're very excited to have George Salas on the webinar today. George is the founder of Empress Capital and Creative STR Wealth. He's built a reputation for transforming short-term rentals into high-performing, design-driven investments. With over 130 transactions and over 85 optimized properties across top U.S. markets, George helps investors unlock double-digit returns and long-term equity growth. So without further ado, George, the floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I'm still doing a 30-second setup here just to make sure I've got
Okay,
everything on track.
sure.
Um, Cool. All right. Good to go now. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your valuable time this morning. Today, we're going to learn how to build tax-free short-term rental cash flow inside your IRA. So why don't we get started? So first of all, in today's session, I share a step-by-step framework that has produced reliable results for us and our investors for over 7 years in the short-term rental space. Also, if you stay until the end, I'll walk you through how much more you can earn by doing it inside your IRA through a really cool tool that Joe and the Camaplan team has provided me to plug in here for you today. By the end of today, you'll know exactly how to find the right markets, increase returns through functional design, keep your rentals booked, and automate management for steady, predictable performance. So why listen to us today? This is in theory. We've completed over 130 transactions, currently manage over $2.3 million in annual STR revenue. And personally, I've invested more than $1 million of our own capital alongside our partners, between my wife and I. These strategies you'll see today are proven and repeatable. These are some of our portfolio properties in Texas that I wanted to show you real quick. As of yesterday, we're officially in 5 states, including Texas, Washington, Colorado, and also the two new additions for this month. This month's closings are in Ohio and Missouri. We're closing at about four, one yesterday and three tomorrow in Missouri for our St. Louis portfolio. So let's get started here with a little bit about myself. My entire story began in Peru. I was, grew up pretty poor. I grew up in an adobe house that collapsed. I moved to the U.S. at 15, didn't speak English, ran through cultural challenges as I grew up here. I worked for a decade in the service industry and I chased the American dream, but still felt stuck. Showing you that picture of my house, and that's us on the two pictures on the left in our little adobe house. You walked out and chickens were running around. So, uh, my first venture, I lost $300,000 as an investor, limited partner in a, nightclub venture that I gradually invested as a limited partner through a partnership, in the 2015-ish to 2017. That was sort of a rock bottom for me. Didn't have the skills, didn't have the ability to be able to really understand how to invest and how to mitigate the risk. So I hit rock bottom after that, right? So I decided to pivot and launch a real estate business, just go all in, I was working 18-hour days and my first flip I profited about $46,000. So that was the one win that I needed to have in order to continue to go through. But that was the launch. By the end of that year, 2018, I had launched 10 short-term rentals, and in the first year amongst our investments in real estate business, we generated $319,000. So there's my first Airbnb at the bottom. That was an apartment, and we were playing the rental game. We were renting and subleasing at first, before we started investing in purchasing properties. So the pivot for us was from, quantity to quality per se. By the end of 2020, I had over around 55 short-term rental units, mostly small apartments. A lot of them were, rental arbitrage, that type of strategy, right, where you would rent and sublease a property. And then COVID hit us pretty hard and our revenue collapsed for a few months there. So we decided to pivot and enter the experiential or quality game per se. Today, we manage and own around 25 high-end experiential short-term rentals worth about $19 million in assets. And personally, my wife and I own about 6.5 million in our personal portfolio, which pretty much covers all of our needs. Our son, our family, that's how we live, and that's how we do this every single day. So why am I sharing this with you? Well, I went from broke to building a $2.3 million short-term rental portfolio business, but learning the hard lessons in creating systems. And that became what I call now the 5-pillar short-term rental framework. And my mission now is to help others build predictable short-term rental wealth in the space. So let's begin. So we start off with pillar number one, the perfect market research methodology. So I call it, it's a data-driven method that starts with market selection. So before you even buy a property, you know exactly where to invest. This is where 90% of investors go wrong. They buy based on emotion, not data. So we use in our company, Empress Capital, two types of data: quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative data is the numbers, the property metrics and market metrics and analytics. Examples, they're going to be the purchase price, the down payment, the cost to launch, the returns. And most real estate investors get the numbers right, but they miss the other 50%, which is the qualitative data. So for us, qualitative data is the non-numerical SDR market metrics. These are the insights that most of us miss. They are insights that we gather from guest preferences, local culture, neighborhood vibes, experiential demand. It's the feedback, it's the reviews, the design trends, the community perceptions that really tell us why travelers choose one property or market over the other, right? Unlike hard numbers, these quantitative or qualitative data analytics gives us the actual story behind the data, helping us anticipate what creates unique guest experiences and brand loyalty. So the first step is identifying the perfect market. Now we're getting a little bit deeper, and today I'm actually revealing pretty much everything for you folks today. So here's what we do first. When we're searching a market, we shortlist 3 to 5 markets. Okay, so we do it based on personal interests, right? What do we care most about? Could be something close. It could be something that a place that we travel too often. We look at our budget and we say, okay, we're going to stay within XYZ, which is what we can afford, right? We look at the regulations, and we choose these areas with clear, stable SDR loss, right? And we use what we call the 20% rule or 20% ratio, right? It's the annual revenue versus the purchase price. So if we buy a $500,000 property, our consistent revenue over our 5 to 7 year projection must exceed or equal to 20% of the purchase price, right? And then we look at the market saturation, which is basically the demand versus supply. And how you define that quickly is your market brings in an X amount of revenue. You compare that to the number of listings, and the number of listings, if the number of listings increases 10% the next year and your demand increases 10%, then there is equilibrium. There's no market saturation. That's how we measure. That's one of the metrics that we use that pretty much is what we call our sweet spot. So let's go through a case study real quick. So this is a high yield market pick that I'm going to go through. It's a property in Cypress, Texas. Was a strategic choice for us. The property did not have HOA regulations. The 20% rule worked for us. The demand was outpacing the supply, right? So we use our sweet spot methodology, which I'll cover in just a second. And we targeted 4 bedrooms and above in this market. And we used that methodology, which I'm going to describe here in just a second. So here's a property that we acquired in Texas that I want to cover real quick. Unique property with potential to create $120,000 plus in revenue on a $250,000 raise. Okay. We screened it actually at 29% of purchase price, right? So it broke that rule, $131,000 in pretty much projected revenue. Low seasonality, which meant that the property would stay booked year round, and the demand growing more than the supply. And we use the sweet spot, which is basically us creating the buy box, right? So this is what it looks like when I'm searching for the top markets. The next thing is we do a narrow on that search. We narrow from the market. So it could be Houston to Cypress, and from Cypress to this Lakewood Forest area that I have pinpointed on the screen, right? So those micro markets usually are the ones that we find sort of the niches, the riches in the niches, right? The niches are what we look for, and we look for certain things in that area. It could be revenue drivers, such as maybe areas that people frequent to, or maybe locations, or just an area that doesn't have a lot of Airbnbs or short-term rentals because the regulations are stringent, right? So we maybe found an area, which we did specifically here. We found an area that had really large lots, houses were, pretty far from each other. So there was no HOA regulations either. So takeaways from Empress proprietary market selection: Regulatory stability is non-negotiable. The 20% rule is a baseline, not a bonus. Demand versus supply drives long-term profitability. Submarket selection is critical for performance, like going niche, and financial analysis must be data driven. This is how we found a high yield market before ever looking at a property. Now let's see how we find the perfect property within that market. So pillar number 2 here in our 5 pillars is the perfect property and acquisition strategy. So for us, choosing the right property is the most critical decision. The wrong property can destroy the returns. That's why we use the sweet spot formula, right? Ensuring the revenue potential, guest appeal, and value all align. This protects downside while maximizing returns. So building a buy box and finding the perfect property for us is not just choosing pretty houses or ugly houses. We build a buy box based on the following. We identify profitable areas via price to rent ratio. We clean and analyze that data to make it accurate. So we filter out all the bad data. This could be done within the platforms, right? And it could be done by just removing listings that don't belong there or low reviews, or we use a 270-day minimum availability for each listing, right? And then we try to spot revenue driving features such as pools, backyards, game rooms, right? So then we define a strict buy box, and we put it down, right? And then we go to work. We use Zillow to pinpoint the availability on the properties because it can give us the ability to search across the US rather than going to our local MLS. So the next step for us is underwriting the deal and executing. Okay, so we underwrite our deals 3 ways, folks. First, we do worst case scenario, realistic, and target scenarios. So in our models, we have 3, but when we put it out, we make sure that the worst case scenario is our first lever or our threshold. If the worst case scenario is not profitable, we simply pass, right? So we focus on top 10% properties for the fact of resilience. And then and only then we execute when the data supports strong cash flow and you have a threshold of minimum, aka worst case scenario, that will give us the ability to, hey, if this does that bad or it does not go as planned, we can still make some money, right? We can still vent profit at the end of the year. And that's how we make a decision. We do it based on data, but we also look at the qualitative data, right? And we combine those. When you build your buy box, the buy boxes have both qualities, right? They have a section for quantitative data, which is the underwriting piece, right? And there's also a section for qualitative data. So as I walk you through the same case study for our Cypress property, I'm going to show you some numbers, and I'm actually going to show you the actual 2024 performance and how we projected our returns based on 2024 performance over the next 5 years. We took the first 8.5 months of actual performance. Okay, so let's go through these numbers really quickly. So 2024 revenue projections, year 0, because we had an 8.5 month run instead of 12 months. Our prorated projections were 100,000 and about 500. Okay, so now for 2025, as I showed you earlier, it was around 132,000. That's year 1. But here's what actually happened. So 2024 actual revenue for that amount of time was 150,645, an actual 48% above pro forma. And 2024 actual cash flow was 35,805, which was almost 100% of our full year underwriting. Okay, so now we did encounter some challenges, as we usually do as real estate investors, right? So I'm gonna walk you through them right now. So we had a hurricane last year hit hit us here in Houston, and we figured, oh well, I mean, there's nothing we could do when the hurricane was like 24 hours from us. So I was like, okay, well, if something's gonna happen here, we've got to be protected. We have insurance, that's great, right? So part of our property flooded, right? We had it's just a 3 unit, it had a main house, it has a main house, 4 bedroom. The 2-1 has a 2-1 and a 1-1. The 2-1 flooded, and it was water that accumulated in the backyard, and it just went inside the house. So we had to spend a little bit of money in there, and unprojected capex was around $30,000. Still, actual net cash flow was 3508, right? Even with unexpected costs, the property delivered strong returns. So today, this is 2025, our underwriting was pro forma at 132,000. But with the performance of 24, our target projection was 160,000, and we are on track to hit that right now. So based on that, our cash flow projection increased by about 17% this year based on the actuals of last year. And I'll walk you through that. So the property is definitely on track to become a high yield cash flowing asset. So by this time, we're already looking at the numbers. As you guys can see, starting from the left to right, this is QBO data, $150,000 in revenue, walking you down through, and this is our 5 years. So we put in all the data on the left side with the cash flow, right? And then we projected the entire 5 year, and we provided this to our investors as a metric to be able to look at the numbers and see, okay, based on the first 8.5 months, here's how I think we're going to perform compared to what we put on the pro forma. Okay, here's a few pictures of this particular property that we did before and after. We did a full pool renovation, and we added this really cool 11-foot kids pool right next to the pool. Our team was working, and the whole entire project was about 3.5 months to launch. So key takeaways from property and acquisition strategy. Not all SDRs are created equal. Right? Benchmark against top 10% listings. That's your target. And underwrite for worst case scenario as your starting point, so that even if something happens, the market changes, you're still profitable for that property. Right? So the next pillar number 3, is the perfect SDR design. Here's where we get to the fun part, the qualitative data. Most of us always miss that, right? So that's why I have a beautiful wife that she might be on this call, and she is the key to all of this. I do not have the eye for this, folks. So let's talk about your short-term rental. Your SDR isn't just a property, is what I say. It's an experience. It's a guest experience, right? Design determines ADR. Design determines occupancy and review. So it benchmarks it, right? So if you launch a regular property, you can only get to maybe 50, 60% of the actual performance of that property. When you really add the functional design piece and the amenities, you can maximize that property, right? So it increases nightly rates, occupancy, and booking conversion. Okay, I'm going to show you some examples here in just a second of some of our properties. So here are some before and afters for some of our projects. This is a project in Houston, Texas. That was before. As you guys can see, we went all in. We added these really cool features on the walls and the ceilings. We added, the fireplace on the right. I think that's blocked on the picture. And a property without this flavor, right? Without this attention-grabbing features, it's not going to perform as well. So a lot of these things just catch the eye, right? And this is one of our smaller ones. We've had this for 5 years. It's only a 3.2. We don't really go there. So here's some more examples. This deal we recently did, and I've got a video to show you. So if you want to see that video, it's coming up in just a second. I'll love to get some yeses in the chat. So this is another property that we recently redid. We redid with about $7,000, and our performance has increased. So far, it's only been a month or two, but we've had this one also for 4 years. Just showing you an example of a picture on the left with what does a picture with the amenities look like, right? So, and then next, I've got a really cool video. If you guys will allow me to take you through about 2 minutes, I'd love to walk you through what this, actual video looks like. So, let's go. Okay, we're gonna restart this because there was no audio. All right, so let me know if that was helpful, because I have not done that before. I was able to build in um, the video in there and into our Canva presentation last night. So, but anyway, we'd love to know in the chat if that was helpful to be able to visualize what an actual property looks like, right? So now let's go through the same case study, right? And here I'm going to highlight a few things, right? So SDRs usually perform because of design, right? So there's a huge jump when you either design your property from the get-go or redesign it, right? So the problem usually is that low ADRs, right? Inconsistent bookings. We've seen that across, and even in some of our properties that we got 4 or 5 years ago, our design skills, or even sometimes in some of the properties that we even bought ourselves for our personal portfolio, we didn't go all out, right? So budget constraints could be one of the reasons. Others could be, uncertainty. But for us, right, this market has been very good to us, especially in Houston with um, the amount of supply that we have here, right? Outdated designs, blending with competition, another problem, right? So how do you transform these properties? Well, you saw it in the video: cohesive, experience driven design and amenities. Amenities for us are ROI. So anything we put in there has to have an ROI behind it. So it could be fire pits, feature walls, curated interiors, game areas, game rooms, like game tables, right? Pools, hot tubs, seating, and amongst other things. For us, it's about creating Instagrammable spaces. So in this case, with this property that you guys just saw, it's been about 3 months. So we went through the summer. I've seen our ADRs, which means average daily rates, go from $500-600 a night in a small town where there's maybe 100 short-term rentals, right, to about 1,000 a night in some locations. So we've seen an increase of about 25% with only about $15,000 in redesign per se, right? We went in and refreshed it from 2 years ago. Okay, for us is about creating Instagrammable stays that guests love to share. Okay, so the result, up to 200% increase in ADR. So when you do this right, the comparison between a regular pool property that just has a pool anywhere, or that has its main driving amenity, just a regular house anywhere in the world, right? Versus what you just saw, right? Which has many, many details, right? For us, the increase could hit up to 200%, right? Occupancy in this property skyrocketed more than last year. ADR skyrocketed, so better guests. When guests pay more, they're actually better, right? So, and then the reviews always highlight these unique experiences, which drives more money, more reviews. So it's kind of like a trickle effect chain reaction. So by doing this to your properties without going too overboard, you could also go too overboard. You're actually creating the experience, and you don't have to work as hard. Okay, so another case scenario, we did this with another property. And then next, I want to touch on the opportunity cost of bad design. So imagine the cost of staying average, missed bookings, right? We've seen it. Low nightly rates, no word of mouth marketing, people not referring these properties to their friends or family, right? Now imagine being fully booked, double your nightly rate. If you're watching this and you do have a short-term rental, right, just try it, but you've got to do it strategically, and you'll see the difference, right? So guests like to share properties they love. They put them in their favorites on all their platforms, right? And they even share them on social media, right? The big difference is design. Okay, so quick showcase here: calendar empty, calendar full after the sign. And then a few takeaways for us: guests book experiences, especially today. They book experiences. They want those experiences. They don't book bets, right? So these touches, these small little things that you put, these these bold themes increase bookings. High impact visuals sell your property. For us, this is strategic and design that drives revenue. That's the only reason and the main reason why we do it, because it helps us accomplish our goal of making the impact for not just our investors, but also the guests. They love them, right? So I I do a lot of research, and one of the big points today is that in today's consumer age, millennials are the biggest consumer group, and the reason why platforms like Amazon, Airbnb have grown so big so fast, it's because of one main reason: the ease of use, right? And for us, I mean, if you're older and listening to this, and you might not know how to use tech, but once you get used to it, it's so much easier than doing it the old way, right? You don't have to call anyone; it's just with the click of a button, right? So there's a lot more, and ease of use with this consumer group is increasing, and that's why the short-term rental industry on its own is it's blowing up and expanding worldwide, and even in the US as well. Okay, so next is pillar number 4, what I call STR marketing and pricing slash revenue. So for us, um, a beautiful short-term rental means nothing if it's empty. Our revenue game plan fills calendars, SEO listings, dynamic pricings, amenity-driven photography, right? Automation and retargeting to direct bookings, right? We do all of this, and we've implemented recently lifestyle photography, which is another hack where you essentially hire a photographer and they bring people, or you go when you're taking photos, you go and you bring your family while they're doing the shoots, right? We did 2 birthdays at that property you guys saw in Alvin, Texas, and we use our photos as a lifestyle photography. We're doing that in other properties as well. When people see themselves, so this is the marketing 101. When people see themselves and they imagine themselves being at that listing, that's the emotional trigger that makes them book, right? They see themselves at the property, and then they get emotionally connected with this property, going deeper than just looking at an empty property. So next, I want to walk you through a little bit about what we do in terms of our back end, right? We use a platform that acts as our property management software. All of our listings are in there. We professionally manage. We use about 6 technology pieces, and today we're implementing even agentic AI inside our business. Okay, so quick case study. We've seen 25 to 35% revenue growth with dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is another piece, right? So this property struggled with low bookings and a price war, or several of our properties did at some point when we launched them with minimal budgets, right? As we changed them, right, we saw the increase, but one of the keys wasn't just the design. The design only gets us to launch, right? And when they're booking, even if you have great design, if you don't fluctuate your pricing along with the market, then you're going to stay emptier than you could. So our key here is dynamic pricing, which is market dependent, demand dependent pricing, where we use several tools, including Price Labs, Revenue IQ. We adjust in real time. We are dropping Revenue IQ, and we are implementing AI. We have a revenue manager in each market that helps us pretty much understand the market, brings the data, and optimizes prices on a daily basis, right? So, and how you do it is you optimize it in the low drops of the market, and you maximize it in the peaks of the market. And as you guys already understand, this is a seasonal business, right? And a seasonal business goes up and down. So we have high seasons, summers, people are traveling all day, and then you have low seasons. So if you don't go down with those low seasons, you're going to stay empty, right? So the result of doing dynamic pricing is around a 25 to 35% increase in revenue, right? More consistent bookings at higher rates because now you're maximizing at what the market is paying and you end up outperforming local competition. Here's a screenshot of our backend pricing tool. Okay, marketing and pricing takeaways. We use a multi-channel strategy to fill in the gaps. Keyword-rich listings to improve the visibility. We use direct bookings to increase margins. As I showed you in one of the screenshots before, we are in many platforms, including Booking.com, VRBO, Google Vacation Rentals, our own revenue engine, right, and several more, right? Automated follow-ups, drive repeat stays, et cetera, et cetera. So next, last pillar here, folks, guest experience and operational excellence. This is the fuel behind that race car, right? If you built a race car now you've got to jump into operations. If you're an active investor, this is a heavy one for you. If you're not an active investor, a team like ours does all the heavy lifting, right? So winning in short-term rentals isn't about reacting. It's about anticipating what these guests need by using certain aspects in the business, such as automation, smart locks, review systems, and delivering those five-star experiences via the amenities and those anticipations throughout their stay and before their stay, right? That's what we call concierge level guest experience. Few of our reviews here. So last case study here. Big problem, inconsistent bookings, mixed reviews, guest complaints, communication check-ins, missing amenities, right? This is a problem because this business is very, very detailed. So how you solve that is by automating guest messaging, right? Creating smart locks for your properties that create seamless access. And now that those smart locks now connect to apps like Hostaway and Guesty and all these technology pieces, and you can center them all to be managed under one roof, right? Which is beautiful. Premium touches, welcome gifts, late checkouts, right? The ability to upsell. This also creates more revenue, right? These are premium touches such as, renting additional spaces or bringing in, chefs or providing late checkouts in between stays that are pre-sold. And we do that inside our actual platform before they even book, right? So they can select, hey, I want a late checkout on an early check-in. Boom, here's $125, here's $150, right? They can do that, right? So then what happens is you increase repeat bookings and referral bookings, right? And you get consistent five-star ratings across platforms with that piece, the guest experience piece. Now that results in about 50% reduction in hands-on management. So you got to anticipate and create first. It's more work up front, but it's way less headaches when you're managing it later on, right? So now let's cover the opportunity cost of bad guest experience. One-star reviews, you could have lost bookings, damaged reputation, and when you change that, you create raving fans, right? Five-star reviews, repeat bookings, right? People refer their listings to other people. They put it in their favorites, right? The difference is operational excellence. Okay, so takeaways here. Systematizing everything, housekeeping, maintenance, guest messaging, delivering premium touches, welcome gifts, seamless checkouts, turning guests into repeat customers with loyalty programs, right? We're implementing the loyalty piece here shortly, right? But time out. I know I've covered a lot today, so take a breath. I don't think I went as fast as I usually do because I removed some information. So, but still take a breath, right? Relax. I know this is a lot of information. Rome was not built in a day. So in our short time today, I've condensed, cramped, packed, and squeezed together as tightly as possible our process for predictable and stable real estate cash flow. The seven-figure short-term rental framework I've used to generate over 8 million in bookings by now, right? Which pretty much are broken down into the perfect market research methodology, the perfect property acquisition, right? Design, perfect design, right? Marketing and revenue, and a five-star operations blueprint. So this is holistically at the highest level what it takes to run a successful short-term rental business. So next, what I like to do, folks, is sort of go over qualified versus non-qualified funds, and I love to get some comments on the chat just to hear out, what you guys' thoughts. If you have any questions, please drop them right now. We're about to go into Q&A for these last 12 minutes, but let's take a quick look at uh, the chart here. So,
And I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, George. Just a quick housekeeping detail. So the chat is disabled, but we have our
oh,
Q&A option up, and some people have used it to ask some questions. So we will get to those questions at the end. But someone also used it to say that they loved the video that you showed earlier. So if you do have a question during this time, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. And for those who did ask the questions, we will definitely be sure to get to those at the end.
thank you. Appreciate that. So in the next few minutes, folks, I want to show you what happens when you invest $50,000 through your IRA, right? And how you can keep about $15,000 compared to investing outside your IRA, right? So that's pretty much about a 43% higher net return, net cash flow, all from legally avoiding taxes that eat into your gains, right? So same deal, same asset, right? But just your IRA puts more money back into your pocket by doing this. So here, we tip the blue highlight on the 10% here is the typical return for our investors in terms of cash flow. So that's cash flow income, right? So if 10% is, you could change this up if you want, right? But if somebody invests 50,000 with your IRA, and this is without your IRA, cash flow typically would be around, well, that's the advantage actually. So if your cash flow is 10% and you do a 5-year term, right? So that's $5,000 per year. 50,000 times 10%. That's 5,000 times 5 years. That's 25,000. So your net cash flow would be around 25,000, right? So in a typical scenario, you would do the same thing, but then you would have to pay capital gains taxes or whatever taxes you qualify or you're in tax bracket you're in, right? So in the case of investing through your IRA, right, your net gain is 25 versus 16,000. The advantage is about $8,900, which is about a 55% advantage or more margin, right? So now, if you were to do this in the equity piece, right, if you invested the same 50,000, our typical target multiple is about 2x, right? So you would get back 100,000 in those 5 years, right? At the end of those 5 years. So obviously separately from your cash flow, right? And if you, well, actually 100,000 would be included in your cash flow. So if you take your 25,000 and then you take your return of principal, right? And then your capital gain in terms of equity, right? Your net capital gain is that on the equity piece. And if you were to invest that same amount of money and doing it through a non-qualified plan without an IRA, right, you would net about $18,000 at exit when you sell this because you have to pay those taxes, right? So the advantage here is about 34% or 6,300. So the difference, it speaks for itself. It's about 15,000 and 152,000, so 43% more gain if you combine your cash flow and your total equity, right? So that's what I wanted to cover. And then next, what I like to do is finish up with a thank you for attending to everyone, right? So if it lets me. So there you go. Thank you for attending. Appreciate you being here today. If you have any questions or we want to go through some Q&A here, Matt, in the next few minutes. I know we have about 8 minutes to finish up Q&A.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you.
Let's jump right into it. So there was a question that came up probably in the first half uh, presentation, and this was from Jim. And to paraphrase, Jim asked, uh, what's the kind of the profile of the consumer who's paying for paying these kinds of prices for these short-term rentals? What does your consumer look like?
The consumer varies, but high net worth families that like to travel in groups is one of them. Okay. So the second one is going to be larger groups of just median income or higher, also families. But the difference between the high net worth families and the median income families is that high net worth is a family that has XYZ amount of dollars. Sorry, I want to put the thank you slide here. But they are just going with their children, their son, hey, I want to get away for the weekend, right? And that's more of sort of a mountain, just higher end, super luxury, right? We're in the middle. So what we do is we take these median price properties. 465 is right about a median, about 10% above median, right? It was one of the examples I showed earlier. And we convert them into higher end, but they're not high end real estate, right? So the second group would be a large group, or a family that needs a space. So a lot of what we see today is before weddings. My family's graduating, right? But we're getting away for the weekend with our family before school starts, or summer trip, right? Between our two families or one family, right? And they choose, and how they actually, like, if it makes sense for you, right? Think of you traveling somewhere with just your family, and it was six, seven people. And then if they were all to get a room or hotel room, let's just say you got three rooms, right? Your hotel rooms of that same type of median luxury would cost you $200 to $300 each per person, right? And at least plus fees, plus this, plus that. So booking a short-term rental that has all the amenities for maybe the same price, but now you get all of these amenities. You get space to cook. You get pretty much luxury compared to a hotel room. So you're having bigger groups come in traveling across different areas of town. So we're getting people for that property in Alvin, Texas. We get people from north of Houston saying, "Hey, we're going to get away to Galveston, but we thought we saw your property and it looked like a resort. So we're going to stay there instead of Galveston, and we're going to drive to the beach, which is 30 minutes only," right? So we get groups like that. Or our city properties will be different avatars, will be people that are coming in, for medical reasons, graduations, but it's always groups, right? Now, where we find the biggest lever for us is when we add more amenities to these properties, then you sort of scale to the next consumer group, which is the higher net worth. And they're not going to hesitate on paying you $500 to $1,000 a night. But when you go 200, 300, we still have some of those properties, right? It's a little bit more difficult, right? So that's a big difference. Does that make sense, Matt? And
Yeah,
was it Martin? No, what was the name? I apologize. I didn't remember the
I think
name.
it was actually Jim. So,
Jim.
yep. So we had another question come in, and this person wanted to know, what is the minimum investment amount required?
The minimum investment in our projects is 50,000, right? But based on, we have different projects, 4 or 5 different projects, and based on, there's one that we can lower to 25. There's some that are 150,000 just because of the magnitude. We only need 2, 3 investors in this one project, right? The returns might be a little bit higher. So, but minimum investment, we usually plan at 50,000.
All right, awesome. And then another question we had come in was just about regulations. It's a hot topic that you see in the news pretty often. How do you manage the different short-term rental regulations that happen on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So regulations for us is a lever as well. We don't go into markets that don't have any regulations. So we use this as a lever to push us into already regulated markets that we know are going to be more predictable and stable on the regulation side, right? So we love regulations, right? So because we know that also how that helps us as investors in the long run is not only being, okay, we're not going to have the city change anything on us, but also you have less competition. So because of regulations, it's another step. So for example, some regulations will say you can't rent the property, you have to own it. Another regulations will say you can't have more than two people per room, right? Or you can only have X amount of properties in this certain area. So they create blocks. So for example, in its zip code, depending on the size, they will change, they will say, there can only be one short-term rental per every 3 blocks. That is a help is a big lever for us, is very big help because it removes the riffraff, it removes these mom and pop operators, right, from coming into these markets. In addition to that, regulatory markets that a little, so there's 3 or 4, like 4 really types of regulations. We go into the middle sweet spot. If we don't want to go too harsh, we don't want to go too low, no regulations, so we go in the middle spot. So yeah, that's about it also. That's about it, Matt.
Okay, and we have about 1 minute left, so I'll use that time to actually ask one more question, and then we'll close it out. But the last question that we had was, there is, talk about people who are having challenges just sort of managing short-term rentals as an asset. Can you speak to that and talk about how you've been mitigating those risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So a quick story back. It might take about 1 minute, so I apologize if I go over that. I respect everybody's time. So a quick story back. The industry today is stabilizing back to 2019 pre-COVID levels. In 2021 and 22, you had a ton of investors, aka the landlords and real estate investors who never entered the space, hear about the short-term rental boom. They entered the space, they inflated the space. So everybody was talking about it. These are operators and new SDR investors who did not have experience. They pretty much created their own little basic budget property. So they would take their long-term rentals and they would think that by changing them into a short-term rental, they would make more money. Now, that might have worked for a year, 21, 22, right? But then after that, once the market stabilized, a bunch of them started losing money. They did not do exactly what we did. So a lot of the talks, right? And you're going to have this in any industry, right? It's happening in several industries, but a lot of our planning comes from historical data, right? I'm not jumping into markets because I think that they're going to make a lot of money over the next couple years. I'm looking back to four sets of factors, and number one is 2007 to 2012 data from the vacation rental industry, right? AKA the hospitality industry back then. Then I'm looking at the median home price. I want to see if the real estate market is slow growth and stable, right? Even during a recession. So to me, that data gives me future stability in case we had a recession in the next 5 years. Then we look at the last 5 years, right? So 2025 to 2020, we removed 2020, we removed 2021. So we now look at 24 and 25, and we see what the stability was in those markets in both. Now we could use short-term rental data, AirDNA, because there was no short-term rental data back in 2007. There was only hospitality data, hotels, restaurants. And we do the same thing. So we look at historical, 2 sets of historical from a recession prior, and we look at the historical today to make our decisions. So that is the biggest lever. Now, a lot of these investors that are having challenges, or we're having challenges, they're exiting now. So that's why you have supply going down and the professionals coming in, right, and actually taking over. So as professionals, just like you do anything, right? If you're a professional and you're really good at one thing and this is all you do, then you're going to be much better than someone that just tries to do that one thing on the side, right? So that was 2 minutes. So
All right, a very thorough 2 minutes. All right, well, that is it for our webinar today. Thanks very much, George, for the presentation, for spending some time with us to talk about what you do. Why don't you if you can share your screen, have your contact information up one more time. If you would like
Absolutely.
to reach out to George, you can do so directly, or you can always email us at engage@camaplan.com to get George's contact information. Once again, George, thank you very much, and thank you to
Thank you.
everyone who joined today's webinar.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Too.
Bye.